The fluorescent lights of the corporate office cast harsh shadows across Marcus Chen's face as he stared at the rejection email glowing on his monitor. Subject line: "Thank you for your interest, position filled." The 17th such email in 6 months. His reflection in the black screen showed a man defeated, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow with the weight of accumulated failure. At 28, Marcus had become intimately familiar with rejection. Job applications, business proposals, romantic interests, social circles, everywhere he turned, doors closed before he could even knock. The pattern had become so predictable that he'd started keeping a spreadsheet, tracking each no with the methodical precision of a scientist documenting a failed experiment. 17 rejections for the marketing position he desperately needed. 12 business ideas dismissed by potential investors. 8 women who'd declined second dates. Countless social invitations that never came. The office around him buzzed with the confident chatter of colleagues who seemed to navigate life with an ease he couldn't comprehend. They spoke of promotions, weekend plans, successful presentations, and relationship milestones while Marcus felt invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of success. His current job as a data entry clerk paid barely enough to cover his studio apartment and instant ramen dinners, a far cry from the ambitious dreams he'd harbored in college. That evening, Marcus walked home through the rain-slicked streets of downtown, each step echoing his internal monologue of inadequacy. The city lights blurred through his glasses, creating abstract patterns that reminded him of the chaos in his mind. He passed couples laughing over dinner, groups of friends heading to bars, successful-looking individuals confident in their stride, and felt the familiar ache of being on the outside looking in. His apartment welcomed him with its familiar emptiness. A single room containing a twin bed, a desk cluttered with rejection letters, and a small kitchen where he microwaved another meal for one. The walls were bare except for a college diploma that felt increasingly meaningless and a motivational poster his mother had given him: "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts." The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus had always been the type to internalize failure, to assume that rejection meant something fundamental was wrong with him rather than considering external factors. His inner voice had become a relentless critic, cataloging every social misstep, every professional disappointment, every personal shortcoming with ruthless efficiency. He was his own worst enemy, and he was winning the war against himself. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when his manager, barely 5 years older but infinitely more confident, called him into the office. "Marcus, we're restructuring the department," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Your position is being eliminated. We'll need you to train your replacement over the next 2 weeks." The 18th rejection, and perhaps the most devastating. That night, Marcus sat on his bed staring at his laptop screen, cursor blinking in an empty job search field. The weight of accumulated failure pressed down like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe. For a moment, he considered giving up entirely, accepting that some people were simply destined for mediocrity. But, somewhere in the darkness of that thought, a small flame of defiance flickered. He opened a new document and began typing, Day 1, the Phoenix Protocol. If he was going to be destroyed, he decided, he would do it himself, completely and deliberately, so that something better could rise from the ashes. The man he was had to die for the man he could become to live. The Phoenix Protocol, as Marcus named his transformation plan, was based on a simple premise: if external rejection was inevitable, he would reject his current self first. He would systematically dismantle every aspect of his personality, habits, and mindset that contributed to his failures. It was an act of controlled demolition, designed to clear the ground for new construction. Phase 1 began with brutal self-assessment. Marcus spent 2 weeks documenting every aspect of his life with clinical detachment. His morning routine: wake up 10 minutes before work, skip breakfast, arrive disheveled and already defeated. His social interactions: passive, apologetic, invisible. His professional presence: competent but unmemorable, never volunteering for challenges or speaking up in meetings. His physical health: soft, weak, neglected. His emotional state: reactive, defensive, pessimistic. The exercise was painful but illuminating. Marcus realized he'd been living in reaction mode for years, responding to life rather than directing it. He was a passive participant in his own existence, waiting for opportunities to find him rather than creating them. The man in the mirror was someone he wouldn't hire, wouldn't date, wouldn't befriend. That man had to go. Physical transformation became the foundation of his reconstruction. Marcus had always dismissed fitness as vanity, but he began to understand it as the most basic form of self-respect. He couldn't afford a gym membership, so he transformed his apartment into a training ground. Push-ups against the wall progressed to full push-ups on the floor. Bodyweight squats replaced elevator rides. He ran through the city streets at dawn, each step a declaration of war against his former self. The first weeks were agony. His body, accustomed to sedentary comfort, rebelled against every movement. His muscles screamed, his lungs burned, and his mind supplied a constant stream of excuses to quit. But Marcus had learned to distrust his instincts. They had led him to failure. Instead, he created systems that removed choice from the equation. Workout clothes laid out the night before. Alarm clock placed across the room. Running shoes by the door. He automated virtue, making good choices easier than bad ones. Diet followed the same systematic approach. Marcus calculated his nutritional needs with the same precision he'd once applied to data entry. Gone were the convenience foods and emotional eating that had been his companions through years of disappointment. He meal prepped with military efficiency, transforming his tiny kitchen into a production line of healthy fuel. Each meal became a choice between the man he was and the man he was becoming. Sleep, something he'd never considered a skill, became another frontier of improvement. Marcus researched sleep hygiene with academic rigor, transforming his bedroom into an optimized recovery chamber. Blue light filters on his devices, blackout curtains, temperature regulation, consistent sleep and wake times. His body began to feel different, stronger, more energetic, more resilient. But, more importantly, his mind began to feel different. Clearer. More focused. More confident. The mental transformation proved more challenging than the physical. Marcus had to learn to recognize and interrupt decades of negative thought patterns. He kept a journal of his internal dialogue, horrified to discover how cruel he was to himself. The voice in his head spoke to him in ways he would never speak to another human being. That voice had to be fired. Meditation became his tool for mental renovation. At first, sitting still with his thoughts felt like torture. His mind raced with worries, regrets, and self-criticism. But, gradually, he learned to observe these thoughts without being consumed by them. He began to see the difference between facts and the stories he told himself about facts. Being rejected for a job was a fact. Being unemployable was a story. The job was an opportunity. The story was optional. Reading became another cornerstone of his transformation. Marcus devoured books on psychology, philosophy, business, and personal development with the hunger of someone trying to rebuild their entire worldview. He learned about growth mindset, cognitive biases, and emotional intelligence. He studied successful people not to worship them but to understand the systems and principles that drove their success. Each book challenged another assumption about himself and the world. He discovered that charisma could be learned, that confidence was a skill, that leadership was a practice rather than an inborn trait. The knowledge was liberating and terrifying, liberating because it meant change was possible, terrifying because it meant his failures were largely of his own making. Professional development became Marcus's new obsession. Since he had no job to protect, he had nothing to lose in pursuing aggressive growth. He enrolled in online courses in digital marketing, data analysis, and project management. He obtained certifications in tools he'd never used, learned programming languages that intimidated him, and developed skills that made him valuable in a rapidly changing economy. But, more than acquiring new capabilities, Marcus learned to present himself differently. He practiced elevator pitches until they became natural. He learned to speak with conviction rather than apology, to make statements rather than ask permission. He studied body language, voice modulation, and the subtle art of presence. The awkward, invisible man began to disappear, replaced by someone who commanded attention simply by walking into a room. Networking, once a source of anxiety, became a strategic practice. Marcus approached it like any other skill, learning the mechanics of building professional relationships. He attended industry meetups, joined professional associations, and engaged with thought leaders on social media. Each interaction was an opportunity to practice his new identity, to receive feedback on his transformation. The first sign that the Phoenix Protocol was working came at a marketing conference 3 months into his journey. Marcus found himself in conversation with a successful entrepreneur who, after 15 minutes of discussion, handed him a business card and said, "We should talk about opportunities at my company." 6 months earlier, Marcus would have been invisible in such a setting. Now, he was being sought out. But the real test came in personal relationships. Marcus had always struggled with dating, approaching it from a position of scarcity and desperation that repelled potential partners. He realized that he'd been trying to find someone to complete him rather than becoming someone worth choosing. The Phoenix Protocol required him to fall in love with himself first. He practiced social skills with the same dedication he applied to fitness. He learned to listen actively, to ask engaging questions, to be genuinely interested in other people's stories. He developed hobbies that brought him joy: photography, cooking, hiking, activities that made him more interesting and interested. He learned to be comfortable in his own company, which paradoxically made him better company for others. The transformation wasn't linear. There were setbacks, days when the old Marcus reasserted himself with familiar patterns of self-doubt and negativity. But he'd learned to view these moments as data rather than verdicts. Each failure became feedback, each rejection became redirection, each setback became setup for a comeback. 9 months into the Phoenix Protocol, Marcus received a call that would test everything he'd built. Sarah Martinez, the CEO of a growing tech startup, had heard about his work through networking connections. She was looking for someone to head their marketing department, someone who could think strategically while executing tactically. The conversation went well, leading to a formal interview process. The interview was unlike anything Marcus had experienced before. Instead of desperately hoping to be chosen, he found himself evaluating whether the company deserved his talents. He asked probing questions about company culture, growth strategies, and leadership philosophy. He presented ideas for improving their marketing approach, demonstrating value before being hired. When salary negotiations began, he stated his requirements with quiet confidence, prepared to walk away if they couldn't meet his standards. The offer came 2 days later: head of marketing with a salary triple what he'd been earning in his previous job, equity in the company, and the resources to build a team. But, more than the financial success, what struck Marcus was how Sarah described her decision: "You have something special, a combination of humility and confidence, strategic thinking and practical execution. You're someone who's clearly done the work on yourself, and that kind of person does exceptional work for others." The first year in his new role validated Sarah's instincts. Marcus built a marketing team that consistently exceeded targets, developed campaigns that won industry recognition, and created systems that scaled with the company's rapid growth. His team respected him not just for his skills but for his character, the way he handled pressure, supported their development, and maintained integrity in difficult situations. But perhaps the most significant validation came in his personal life. At a photography workshop, Marcus met Elena Rodriguez, an architect whose own journey of self-improvement had led her from a failed marriage to a successful practice and a clear sense of self-worth. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than neediness or fear of loneliness. Elena later told him that what attracted her wasn't his success but his authenticity. "You're clearly someone who's done the work," she said. "You're comfortable with who you are, which makes it safe for me to be comfortable with who I am." Their relationship became a partnership of equals, two complete people choosing to build something together rather than two broken people hoping to be fixed by love. The wedding, 2 years later, was attended by colleagues who respected Marcus as a leader, friends who valued him as a person, and family who marveled at his transformation. Sarah, his CEO, served as best man, a role that symbolized how professional excellence had become personal fulfillment. In his wedding speech, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 years ago, I was a man defined by rejection," he said. "I collected no's like badges of dishonor, proof that I wasn't worthy of success, love, or respect. I thought the world was rejecting me, but I realized the person doing the most rejecting was myself. He paused, looking at Elena, at the faces of people who now saw him as valuable, at the life he'd built through deliberate choice rather than accidental circumstance. The Phoenix Protocol taught me that you can't be destroyed by others if you're willing to destroy your weak self first. Every rejection became redirection, every setback became setup, every failure became feedback. I learned that the only opinion that truly matters is the one you have of yourself, and that opinion is entirely within your control. The applause that followed wasn't just for his words but for the living example of transformation he represented. Marcus had become proof that personal reinvention was possible, that anyone could rise from the ashes of their former self if they were willing to do the work. 5 years after beginning the Phoenix Protocol, Marcus found himself mentoring other young professionals who struggled with similar challenges. He developed a framework for transformation that could be applied by anyone willing to confront their limitations honestly and work systematically to overcome them. The framework had 5 core principles that emerged from his experience. First, radical personal responsibility, the recognition that while you can't control what happens to you, you can control how you respond to what happens to you. Every circumstance becomes an opportunity to choose your character. Marcus learned to ask not why is this happening to me, but how can I use this to become stronger? Second, systematic improvement, the understanding that transformation requires consistent daily actions rather than dramatic gestures. Small improvements, compounded over time, create exponential change. Marcus's physical fitness, professional skills, and emotional intelligence all developed through daily practice rather than occasional bursts of effort. Third, identity-based change, the shift from trying to achieve outcomes to becoming the type of person who naturally achieves those outcomes. Instead of trying to get promoted, Marcus became promotable. Instead of trying to find love, he became lovable. The external results followed naturally from the internal transformation. Fourth, embrace of failure as feedback, the reframe of rejection and setback from verdict to data. Every failure contained information about how to succeed differently. Marcus learned to fail fast, fail cheap, and fail forward, using each setback as education rather than evidence of inadequacy. Fifth, the compound effect of confidence, the recognition that confidence is built through competence, competence through practice, and practice through courage. Each small act of courage built competence, each competence built confidence, and each confidence enabled greater courage. The cycle became self-reinforcing, creating momentum toward continuous improvement. Marcus's story spread through professional networks, inspiring others to begin their own Phoenix Protocol. He spoke at conferences about the intersection of personal development and professional success, always emphasizing that the work was available to anyone willing to do it. The question isn't whether you'll face rejection, he would tell audiences. The question is whether you'll use that rejection to build resilience or reinforce resignation. Every no is either a step toward your goals or a step away from them, depending on how you choose to interpret and use it. The company Marcus had joined as head of marketing went public 4 years later, making him financially independent. But wealth was simply a byproduct of the value he'd learned to create. The real treasure was the man he'd become, confident without arrogance, successful without sacrificing integrity, loved without compromising authenticity. Elena often marveled at the transformation she'd witnessed since meeting him. It's not that you became a different person, she told him. It's that you became who you always had the potential to be. You just had to clear away everything that was hiding that person. Their own relationship became a model for their friends, a partnership where both individuals continued growing, supporting each other's evolution while maintaining their individual identities. They traveled together, built businesses together, and created a home that reflected their shared values of continuous improvement and authentic connection. Marcus's team at work expanded from marketing to general business development, as Sarah recognized his ability to develop not just strategies but people. He became known for taking underperformers and helping them discover their potential, using modified versions of the Phoenix Protocol to address specific challenges. One team member, Jennifer, had struggled with public speaking anxiety that limited her career advancement. Marcus worked with her to break down the fear into manageable components: voice projection, body language, content organization, audience engagement. Through systematic practice and gradual exposure to larger audiences, Jennifer transformed from someone who avoided presentations to someone who sought them out as opportunities to demonstrate expertise. Another team member, David, had excellent technical skills but struggled with leadership presence. Marcus helped him understand that leadership wasn't about dominance but about service, creating conditions where others could do their best work. David learned to listen actively, communicate clearly, and make decisions with confidence. Within 18 months, he was promoted to manage his own team. These success stories reinforced Marcus's understanding that transformation was not just possible but repeatable. The principles that had worked for him could work for others, adapted to their specific circumstances and challenges. The Phoenix Protocol wasn't about becoming someone else, it was about becoming the best version of yourself. As Marcus approached his 10th year of transformation, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from the invisible data entry clerk to the confident leader, husband, and mentor he'd become. The statistics that once defined him had completely reversed. Instead of collecting rejections, he was sought out for opportunities. Instead of being overlooked romantically, he was in a thriving marriage. Instead of being professionally stagnant, he was leading teams and creating value. But the most profound change wasn't in external circumstances but in internal relationship. Marcus had learned to be his own best friend rather than his own worst enemy. The voice in his head had transformed from critic to coach, from pessimist to problem solver, from judge to supporter. The Phoenix Protocol saved my life, he often said, not by changing my circumstances but by changing my relationship to my circumstances. I learned that I could survive my own criticism, which meant I could survive anyone else's criticism. I learned that I could trust my own judgment, which meant I didn't need external validation to feel worthy. I learned that I could create value, which meant I didn't have to accept whatever was offered to me. The framework had evolved over the years, refined through his own continued growth and through helping others apply it to their challenges. What remained constant was the core insight that had started everything: the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Marcus understood that this wasn't about becoming invulnerable to pain or failure. Rather, it was about developing the resilience to bounce back from setbacks, the confidence to take calculated risks, and the wisdom to learn from every experience. It was about building an internal locus of control so strong that external circumstances could influence but never control his sense of self-worth. The transformation was ongoing. Marcus continued to set new challenges for himself, to grow in new directions, to find new ways to contribute value to the world. He learned new languages, developed new skills, took on new responsibilities. Each achievement built upon the foundation of self-respect and systematic improvement he'd established through the Phoenix Protocol. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of his transformation was the impact he had on others. The teams he led consistently outperformed expectations because he created environments where people could grow. The individuals he mentored went on to lead their own transformations, creating ripple effects of positive change. The marriage he'd built with Elena became a model of what was possible when two people committed to continuous growth together. As Marcus looked toward the future, he saw not destinations but directions. The Phoenix Protocol had taught him that fulfillment came not from achieving specific outcomes but from becoming the type of person capable of achieving whatever outcomes he chose to pursue. It wasn't about reaching a finish line but about enjoying the journey of continuous improvement. The man who had once been defined by 17 rejections had become someone who created opportunities rather than waiting for them. The man who had once been invisible had become someone whose presence commanded attention. The man who had once been his own worst enemy had become his own greatest asset. The Phoenix Protocol had proven that transformation was not just possible but inevitable for anyone willing to do the work. It required destroying the weak self not through self-hatred but through self-love, the love that refuses to accept mediocrity when excellence is possible, the love that demands growth rather than stagnation, the love that sees potential and commits to realizing it. Marcus Chen had risen from the ashes of his former self to become exactly who he was meant to be. And, in doing so, he had proven that anyone could do the same. The only requirement was the courage to begin, the discipline to continue, and the wisdom to never stop growing. The Phoenix Protocol was complete, but the Phoenix itself would never stop flying.